Desperate measures. The Galactic Council chamber was in an uproar. Representatives from a dozen star-spanning civilizations argued and shouted, their voices blending into an incomprehensible cacophony. The reason for the chaos was clear: the Zorgans. This belligerent race had swept across the galaxy like a plague, conquering world after world with their advanced technology and merciless tactics. Thus far, the Council races had been unable to mount an effective defense. The Zorgans seemed unstoppable. Amidst the din, Ambassador Zarn of Earth stood and approached the central podium. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. The chamber gradually fell silent as all eyes turned to the human diplomat. Esteemed members of the Council, Zarn began, his deep voice resonating through the hall. We stand at a precipice. The Zorgan threat grows with each passing day. If we do not act decisively, and soon, we risk losing everything we have built. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered dignitaries. They had all seen the reports of Zorgan atrocities, the once proud civilizations reduced to rubble and ash. The time has come for bold action, Zarn continued, and I believe that Earth is ready to take the lead in this fight. The murmurs turned to gasps of surprise and mutters of disbelief. Earth was a relative newcomer to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel mere decades ago. Many of the older, more established races viewed humans as upstarts, too young and inexperienced to play a significant role in galactic affairs. Zarn held up a hand for silence. I know what many of you are thinking. How can Earth possibly make a difference against the might of the Zorgan war machine? The answer lies in our unique strengths, our adaptability, our ingenuity, and our indomitable spirit. The ambassador began to pace, his eyes sweeping the chamber. Human history is a chronicle of conflict and adversity. We have fought wars on a scale that many of you can scarcely imagine, against enemies both external and internal. Through it all, we have endured, and more than that, we have innovated. We have developed strategies and tactics that have allowed us to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. He paused, letting his words sink in. I propose that we bring this same spirit of innovation to the fight against the Zorgans. Let humanity take the lead in developing new weapons, new tactics, new ways of thinking that can catch our enemy off guard and turn the tide of this war. The chamber erupted into a barrage of objections. Preposterous, shouted the ambassador from Sirius B. Earth is a newcomer to the galactic stage. What could you possibly offer that we have not already tried? The humans are too volatile, too unpredictable, argued the Regelian delegate. Giving them a leading role in our military efforts could be disastrous. Zarn weathered the storm of criticism with a stoic expression. When the furor had died down, he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. I understand your concerns, but the fact remains that our current strategies have been ineffective. The Zorgans continue to advance, and every day we delay, more lives are lost. It is time to try something new, and I believe Earth is best positioned to provide the fresh perspective we need. The Syrian ambassador scoffed. And what exactly do you propose, ambassador? What miracle weapon or tactic do you have up your sleeve? Zarn smiled enigmatically. All in good time, ambassador. For now, suffice it to say that humanity has a few surprises in store for the Zorgans, and for the Council as well. He turned to address the entire chamber. I call for a vote. Let the Council decide whether to grant Earth a leading role in the war effort. I believe that, given the chance, we can turn the tide of this conflict and secure a brighter future for us all. The vote was contentious and hard-fought, but in the end, Zarn's impassioned plea swayed enough members to carry the day. By a narrow margin, the Council agreed to let humanity take the lead in the fight against the Zorgans, though many remained skeptical of Earth's capabilities. As the chamber adjourned, Zarn was approached by the Arcturian delegate, a spindly, ethereal being draped in shimmering robes. I hope you know what you're doing, ambassador, the Arcturian said softly. The fate of the galaxy now rests on human shoulders. Zarn met the delegate's gaze with unwavering confidence. "We are ready for this responsibility," he said. "Earth will not let the Council down. The Zorgans have no idea what's coming for them." With those words, Zarn strode from the chamber, his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. The real work was about to begin, and humanity would need every ounce of its vaunted ingenuity and determination to prevail against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The Human Gambit. Admiral Jenna Novak stood at the head of the conference table, her posture straight and her gaze intense. Around her sat the leaders of the Galactic Council's military forces, along with a handful of human officers. They were here to discuss Novak's plan for taking the fight to the Zorgans. "As you all know," Novak began, "the Zorgans have been expanding their territory at an alarming rate. They've conquered dozens of worlds, and their fleet grows stronger by the day. If we don't act soon, they may become unstoppable." She tapped a button on the table, and a holographic display sprang to life above its surface. It showed a star map of Zorgan-held space, with key systems and supply routes highlighted. "Our analysis has identified a weakness in the Zorgan war machine," Novak continued. "They rely heavily on a network of supply depots to keep their fleets fueled and armed. If we can disrupt those supply lines, we can cripple their ability to wage war." The assembled officers murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. The Syrian admiral, a tall, hawk-faced man, leaned forward. "And how do you propose we do that, Admiral Novak?" he asked. "The Zorgans guard their supply routes jealously. Any direct assault would be suicidal." Novak smiled tightly. "We don't need to assault them directly, Admiral. We just need to sabotage them. And for that, we have a plan." She manipulated the holographic controls, zooming in on a specific star system. "This is the Kelduri system. It's deep in Zorgan territory, but our intelligence suggests it's lightly defended. We believe they don't expect an attack this far behind their lines." The display shifted, showing a series of Zorgan supply depots orbiting the system's fourth planet. These depots are a critical hub in the Zorgan supply network. If we can take them out, it will disrupt their operations across an entire sector. The Regelian general, an insectoid being with compound eyes and twitching antennae, chittered skeptically. "And how do you propose to reach these depots undetected?" "The Zorgans will have patrols and sensors watching for any incursion." "That's where our special forces come in," Novak replied. She tapped another control, and the display showed a sleek, angular spacecraft. "This is the Shadow Wolf, a stealth insertion vessel of human design. It can slip past Zorgan sensors and deliver a small team of operatives to the target." She looked around the table, meeting each officer's gaze in turn. "I'll lead the mission myself, along with a hand-picked team of human special forces. We'll infiltrate the depots, plant explosive charges, and get out before the Zorgans even know we're there." The room erupted into a cacophony of objections and doubts. The Syrian admiral slammed his fist on the table. "This is madness," he shouted. "You're proposing to send a handful of humans into the heart of Zorgan territory on a fool's errand. It's suicide." Others voiced similar concerns, arguing that the plan was too risky, that the humans were untested in galactic warfare, that the Council couldn't afford to waste resources on such a long shot. Novak let the arguments wash over her, her expression calm and resolute. When the clamor had died down, she spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand your doubts," she said, "but we're out of options. The Zorgans are winning this war, and if we don't do something drastic, we're all going to end up under their boot. This plan is risky, yes, but it's also our best chance to turn the tide." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Humanity is ready for this. We've faced long odds before, and we've always found a way to prevail. Give us this chance, and we'll show the Zorgans and the galaxy what we're made of." There was a long, tense silence. Then, slowly, the Arcturian delegate raised a slender hand. "I say we let the humans try," they said softly. "We have little to lose and much to gain." One by one, the other officers nodded their assent. Some were still hesitant, but they could see the logic in Novak's plan. And in truth, they were out of alternatives. "Very well, Admiral Novak," the Syrian said grudgingly. "You have the Council's authorization to proceed. But understand this, the fate of the galaxy may well rest on your shoulders. Do not fail us." Novak nodded solemnly. "I understand, Admiral. My team and I will not let you down. We'll strike a blow against the Zorgans that they'll never forget." With that, the meeting adjourned, and Novak strode from the room, her mind already racing with preparations for the mission ahead. She knew the risks were high, but so were the stakes. If humanity could pull this off, it would be a turning point in the war, and a defining moment for their species on the galactic stage. As she made her way to the hangar where the Shadow Wolf awaited, Novak allowed herself a small, grim smile. The Zorgans thought they were invincible, but they were about to learn the hard way what happened when you underestimated human resolve. One way or another, the galaxy would never be the same. Into the fray. The Shadow Wolf sliced through the void of space, its matte black hull blending seamlessly with the eternal night. On board, Admiral Jenna Novak and her team of human special forces prepared for the mission ahead. There were 12 of them in total, each one handpicked by Novak for their unique skills and unshakable courage. They were the best of the best, trained in every form of combat and sabotage known to humanity. As the stealth ship approached the Keldari system, Novak gathered her team in the cramped briefing room. The holographic display showed a detailed schematic of the Zorgan supply depot they were targeting. "All right, listen up," Novak said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We'll be hitting the depot hard and fast. 2 teams, 6 operatives each. Alpha team will focus on the fuel storage tanks, Beta team on the munitions warehouses. We plant the charges, then exfiltrate before the Zorgans can respond." Lieutenant Commander Rai Singh, Alpha team's leader, raised a hand. "What about security, Admiral? The Zorgans are bound to have patrols and defenses in place." Novak nodded. "Our intel suggests the depot has a minimal guard presence. They're not expecting an attack this deep in their territory. But stay sharp. The Zorgans are never to be underestimated." She pointed at the hologram, highlighting potential entry points and escape routes. "We'll approach under cloak, then deploy in stealth pods. Once we're inside, we move quickly and quietly, plant the charges, then rendezvous at the extraction point." Questions? There were none. Novak's team was the best for a reason. They knew their roles and trusted their commander implicitly. "Good. Gear up and be ready to deploy in 30 minutes. And remember, the fate of the galaxy is counting on us. Let's show the Zorgans what humanity is made of." The team dispersed to make their final preparations, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. In the armory, Sergeant Maiko Tanaka, Beta team's demolitions expert, carefully primed the explosive charges they would be using. Each one was a marvel of human ingenuity, designed to deliver maximum damage with minimal collateral. As the Shadow Wolf neared the Keldari system, the tension on board was palpable. Each member of the team knew the risks they were taking, the slim odds of success, but they also knew what was at stake: the freedom and survival of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Approaching target, the ship's pilot, Lieutenant Ava Ramirez, announced over the intercom, "Deploying stealth pods in 3, 2, 1. There was a muffled thump as the pods detached from the Shadow Wolf's hull, each one carrying a 3-person sub-team. Novak, in the lead pod with Singh and Tanaka, watched the supply depot grow larger in their viewport, its stark, utilitarian structures standing out against the planet's reddish hue. "Touchdown in 5, Novak said over the comm. "Remember the plan. Get in, plant the charges, get out. And stay alert. We don't know what surprises the Zorgans might have in store." The pods touched down on the depot's surface, their adaptive camouflage rendering them all but invisible against the metallic landscape. Novak and her team emerged, weapons at the ready, and moved swiftly towards their entry point. They encountered their first Zorgan patrol just inside the perimeter, a trio of hulking reptilian warriors armed with pulse rifles. But the humans were ready for them. Singh and Tanaka took them down with silent, precise shots from their plasma pistols, while Novak hacked the door controls to gain entry. Inside, the depot was a maze of corridors and warehouses, all sterile metal and harsh, flickering light. The humans split into their sub-teams, each one heading for their designated target. Novak led her team deeper into the complex, towards the massive fuel storage tanks at its heart. They moved like ghosts, evading patrols and security systems with practiced ease. At the tanks, Tanaka went to work, planting the explosive charges with quick, deft movements. Novak and Singh kept watch, their senses straining for any sign of Zorgan activity. Charges set, Tanaka reported after a tense few minutes. Beta team, status. Charges set on the munitions warehouses, came the reply over the comm. Heading for the extraction point now. Novak nodded in satisfaction. Copy that, Beta team. Alpha team, move out. They retraced their steps, moving even faster now that their objective was complete. But as they neared the perimeter, alarms began to blare throughout the complex. Intruder alert, a harsh, mechanical voice announced over the intercom. All security forces, converge on Sector 5. Novak cursed under her breath. They've made us. Double time it to the extraction point. Now. They ran, plasma bolts streaking past them as Zorgan warriors emerged from every doorway and corridor. Singh and Tanaka laid down covering fire, their weapons flaring in the gloom. At the perimeter, they found Beta team already under heavy fire, pinned down by a group of Zorgan heavy troopers. Novak and her team flanked them, taking them down with a hail of plasma fire. Everyone to the pods now. Novak yelled over the din of battle. They piled into the stealth pods, Ramirez bringing the Shadow Wolf in low for a quick extraction. Plasma bolts hammered the ship's hull as it swooped down, the pods latching onto its underside with magnetic clamps. All teams aboard, Ramirez reported. Punching it. The Shadow Wolf rocketed away from the depot, its cloaking field shimmering into place. Behind them, a series of massive explosions ripped through the complex, the fuel tanks and munitions warehouses going up in titanic fireballs. In the main hold, Novak and her team collapsed, exhausted but triumphant. They had done it, struck a blow against the Zorgans that would cripple their war effort for months to come. Well done, everyone, Novak said, pride and relief evident in her voice. The galaxy won't soon forget what we accomplished here today. But even as they celebrated, Novak knew this was only the beginning. The Zorgans would be enraged by this attack, and their retaliation would be swift and merciless. The war was far from over, but thanks to the courage and skill of these human warriors, the tide was beginning to turn. As the Shadow Wolf sped back towards friendly space, Novak allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage today, and she knew with unshakable certainty that they were just getting started. Zorgan retaliation. The news of the human strike on the Keldari supply depot spread like wildfire across the galaxy. On 100 worlds, beings of every species cheered the audacious raid, marveling at the courage and skill of the human operatives. But in the dark heart of the Zorgan Empire, a different reaction was brewing. Warlord Crag, supreme commander of the Zorgan war machine, seethed with rage as he watched the footage of his precious depot going up in flames. These humans, he snarled, his reptilian eyes narrowing to slits. They dare strike at us in our own territory. They dare defy the might of the Zorgan Empire. Around him, his subordinates cowered, knowing all too well the depths of their master's wrath. Crag was a legend among the Zorgans, a warrior of unparalleled ferocity and cunning. It was said that he had never lost a battle, never tasted defeat. "They will pay for this insult," Crag hissed, his clawed hands clenching into fists. "We will teach these upstart primates the price of defying the Zorgan race. Ready the fleet for a counterattack. We will strike at the heart of their territory and burn their worlds to ash." The Zorgan war machines sprang into action, vast fleets of warships and troop transports assembling in orbit above the Empire's core worlds. Crag himself took command of the largest force, 1,000 ships strong, bristling with weapons and hungry for human blood. Their target was the Solaris system, home to a dozen human colonies and a key strategic hub for the Galactic Council's war effort. If the Zorgans could take Solaris, they would cut off the human forces from their supply lines and open the way for a massive offensive into Council space. As the Zorgan armada bore down on Solaris, the human defenders scrambled to mount a defense. Admiral Novik, fresh from her triumph at Kildare, took command of the system's defenses, marshaling every ship and soldier at her disposal. "This is it, people," she said grimly as she stood on the bridge of her flagship. "The Dauntless. The Zorgans are coming, and they're out for blood. But we're not going to give them the satisfaction. We're going to fight them tooth and nail, down to the last ship and the last man. The galaxy is counting on us. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The first Zorgan ships dropped out of warp at the system's edge, their hulls gleaming like obsidian in the starlight. They formed up into attack formation and began to advance, their weapons charging with malevolent energy. The human fleet moved to intercept, a motley assortment of vessels from a dozen different worlds. They were outgunned and outclassed by the Zorgan warships, but they fought with a desperate ferocity, throwing themselves at the enemy with reckless abandon. In the thick of the fighting, Novik directed the battle with icy calm, her orders crisp and precise over the comm channels. She watched as her ships took heavy losses, human lives snuffed out in bursts of flame and debris. But for every human ship that fell, they took a Zorgan vessel with them, the enemy paying a steep price for every inch of space they gained. On the planet below, human marines and militia fought a desperate ground battle against Zorgan invasion forces. They turned every city street into a kill zone, every building into a fortress. They fought with improvised weapons and jury-rigged defenses, using every trick and tactic in the human playbook to hold back the reptilian tide. In the ruins of a shattered city, Sergeant Tanaka led a platoon of Marines in a daring counterattack against a Zorgan landing zone. They struck from the shadows, using hit-and-run tactics to sow chaos and confusion among the enemy ranks. "Keep moving," Tanaka yelled as plasma bolts sizzled past her head. "Don't let them pin us down. We hit them hard and fast. Then we fade back into the city." Her Marines obeyed without hesitation, their faces grim and determined beneath their battle helmets. They knew the odds they faced, the sheer overwhelming force of the Zorgan invasion. But they also knew what was at stake: their homes, their families, their very way of life. In orbit, the battle reached a fever pitch as Crag's flagship, the Dreadnought, squared off against Novik's Dauntless. The two massive vessels pounded each other with broadside after broadside, their shields flaring and hulls buckling under the onslaught. On the Dauntless bridge, consoles exploded and crew members were flung like rag dolls as the ship shuddered under the impacts. But Novik held fast, her eyes locked on the tactical display. "Concentrate fire on their weapon systems," she barked. "We need to take out those plasma cannons before they rip us apart." The Dauntless gunners obeyed, pouring a relentless stream of fire into the Dreadnought's flank. Explosions blossomed across the Zorgan flagship's hull as its weapons were systematically dismantled. But even as the Dauntless pressed its advantage, more Zorgan ships were closing in, their weapons hungry for human blood. Novik knew they couldn't hold out much longer. The Zorgan force was simply too massive, too relentless. "Admiral," a sensor officer cried out. "New contacts dropping out of warp. It's the Council fleet." Novik's eyes widened as a vast armada of ships suddenly appeared on the tactical display, bearing the colors of a dozen council races. At their head was the massive Arcturian dreadnought, the pride of Arcturus, its weapons already blazing as it tore into the Zorgan flanks. "This is Admiral Zarn of the Galactic Council," a familiar voice crackled over the comm. "Sorry we're late to the party, Admiral Novak. We had to gather a few friends first." Novak could have wept with relief as the council ships joined the fray, their fresh weapons and troops turning the tide of battle. With the Zorgans caught between the human and council forces, the battle soon turned into a rout, the reptilian ships fleeing back into warp space. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended to, Novak met with Zarn aboard the Pride of Arcturus. The old friends embraced, their faces lined with exhaustion, but also with fierce pride. "You did it, Jenna," Zarn said softly. "You held the line. You gave us the time we needed to mobilize. The galaxy will never forget what humanity accomplished here today." Novak nodded, her eyes distant. "We paid a heavy price," she said, "but we showed the Zorgans that we won't go down without a fight. That will stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." She turned to look out the viewport, at the battered but unbroken human fleet, at the council ships standing proudly beside them. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "The Zorgans will be back, and they'll be angrier than ever. But we'll be ready for them. Humanity will be ready for them." And with those words, a new chapter in the Galactic War began. A chapter written in human blood and courage. A chapter that would echo through the ages as a testament to the indomitable spirit of a small but mighty species from a distant blue world. The Trojan Gambit. In the wake of the Battle of Solaris, the Galactic Council races celebrated the heroism and tenacity of their human allies. The Zorgan advance had been halted, at least for now, and a new sense of hope and determination suffused the Allied forces. But Admiral Jenna Novak knew that their respite would be short-lived. The Zorgans had been bloodied, but not beaten. They would regroup, rearm, and return with a vengeance. And when they did, the Council needed to be ready with a plan to end the war once and for all. In a secret meeting with the Council's war planners, Novak unveiled her latest gambit, a daring plan to strike at the heart of the Zorgan war machine itself. "We've been fighting a defensive war so far," she said, her eyes blazing with intensity, reacting to Zorgan moves, trying to anticipate their next attack. "But we need to take the fight to them. We need to hit them where they live." The assembled strategists and generals murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. Zarn, the Arcturian admiral, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What exactly are you proposing, Admiral Novak?" he asked. Novak tapped a control on the holographic display, zooming in on a star system deep in Zorgan territory. "This is the Nexus system," she said, home to the largest Zorgan shipyards and repair facilities outside of their homeworld. "If we can take out those shipyards, we'll cripple their ability to replace losses and build new ships. It could be the turning point of the war." The room erupted in a cacophony of objections and doubts. "That system is a fortress," the Syrian general exclaimed. "It's guarded by a fleet 10 times the size of anything we could muster. Any attack would be suicide." Novak held up a hand for silence. "Not if we do it right," she said. "Not if we use a little human ingenuity." She manipulated the display again, showing a schematic of a battered, heavily damaged human freighter. "This is the Trojan," she said. "An old cargo hauler, scheduled for decommissioning. We're going to refit it with hidden weapon systems, stuff it full of our best Marines and infiltration teams, and let it be captured by the Zorgans." A stunned silence fell over the room. Zarn was the first to find his voice. "You want to deliberately let the Zorgans capture one of our ships?" he asked incredulously. Novak nodded. "That's right. The Trojan will be programmed to emit a distress signal, one the Zorgans won't be able to resist. They'll bring it into the Nexus shipyards for study, thinking they found easy prey. But once it's inside, the infiltration teams can sneak out and sabotage the shipyards from within. Zarn finished, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, while the Marines cause enough chaos to keep the Zorgans distracted. Exactly, Novak said. We'll also load the Trojan with a nasty surprise, a computer virus designed to infect and disable the Zorgan systems. If it works, it could bring their whole operation grinding to a halt. The room buzzed with excitement and trepidation as the audacity of the plan sank in. It was a gamble, a huge risk. But it was also a chance to strike a decisive blow against the Zorgans, to turn the tide of the war in a single stroke. I volunteer to lead the mission, Novak said, her voice calm and resolute. I'll handpick the teams myself. We'll need our best and brightest for this. Marines, hackers, saboteurs. It's going to be the most dangerous mission of the war, but it could also be the most important. In the end, the Council agreed to the plan. The Trojan was prepared in secret, its true nature hidden beneath layers of deception and misdirection. Novak assembled her team, a motley crew of humans and allies, each one a specialist in their field. There was Sergeant Tanaka, the grizzled Marine who had fought at Novak's side on a dozen worlds. Lieutenant Singh, the brilliant hacker who could break any code, crack any system. And Zarn himself, insisting on coming along to represent the Council races, to share in the danger and the glory. As the Trojan set out on its fateful mission, Novak gathered her team in the ship's cramped briefing room. She looked at each of them in turn, seeing the determination and the fear in their eyes. You all know the risks, she said quietly. You know what we're up against. The Zorgans are going to throw everything they have at us, but we're going to throw it right back at them. We're going to show them what happens when you underestimate humanity, when you underestimate the strength of the Council races united. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of us may not come back from this, she said softly. But know that what we do here today will be remembered for generations. We're not just fighting for ourselves, for our own worlds. We're fighting for the future of the galaxy itself, and that's a fight I know we can win. With those words ringing in their ears, the Trojan set out on its desperate mission, plunging deep into the heart of Zorgan space. They were a tiny spark of defiance against the darkness, a flame of hope in the long night of war. And as they flew towards their destiny, each one of them knew that they were part of something greater than themselves, a struggle that would define the fate of species, of civilizations, of the very stars themselves. They were the tip of the spear, the vanguard of a new era, and they would not fail, could not fail. For the sake of all that they held dear, for the sake of the galaxy itself, they would emerge victorious, or not at all. As the Trojan approached the Nexus system, its crew steeled themselves for the fight of their lives. The Zorgans were waiting for them, hungry for blood and conquest. But the humans and their allies were ready to meet them head-on, to pit their courage and their cunning against the might of a ruthless foe. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and in that moment, as the first shots of the battle rang out, the crew of the Trojan knew that they held that fate in their hands, and they would not let it slip away. Chaos in the shipyards. The Trojan drifted through the void of the Nexus system, its hull scared and battered, its distress beacon pulsing like a wounded heartbeat. On the bridge, Admiral Jenna Novak watched the Zorgan patrol ships approach, their predatory silhouettes growing larger on the view screen. "They're taking the bait," she murmured, her hands tightening on the arms of her command chair. "Get ready, everyone. This is where the real fight begins." In the Trojans' hidden compartments, Marines and infiltrators checked their weapons and equipment, their faces grim and focused. They knew the odds they faced, the sheer scale of the task before them. But they were ready to face those odds, to give everything they had for the sake of the mission. The Zorgan ships closed in, their tractor beams locking onto the Trojan's hull. Novak felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as the freighter was dragged inexorably towards the looming bulk of the Nexus shipyards. "Steady," she said, her voice calm and controlled over the intercom. "Let them bring us in. Remember, once we're inside, we split into teams. Saboteurs, you're with Lieutenant Singh. Your objective is the control systems. Marines, you're with Sergeant Tanaka. Cause as much chaos and confusion as you can. And hackers, you're with me. We're going to upload that virus and bring these shipyards to their knees." A chorus of acknowledgments came back over the comm, each voice tight with tension and anticipation. Zarn, standing at Novik's side, nodded grimly. "And so it begins," the Arcturian admiral murmured. "The greatest gambit in the history of galactic warfare." Novik smiled tightly. "Let's hope it pays off," she said. "For all our sakes." The Trojan shuddered and groaned as it was hauled into the massive hangar bay of the Nexus shipyards. Zorgan soldiers and technicians swarmed around the captured vessel, their reptilian faces twisted with cruel anticipation. But as they moved to board the freighter, they were met with a sudden, devastating blast of violence. The Trojans' hidden gun ports snapped open, spitting plasma fire and shredder rounds into the massed Zorgans. Marines poured out of concealed hatches, their battle cries echoing through the cavernous hangar. Caught off guard, the Zorgans reeled back in confusion and disarray. They had expected a helpless prize, an easy capture. Instead, they found themselves in a bloody, desperate battle for survival. In the heart of the chaos, Novik and her team of hackers raced through the shipyard's corridors, fighting their way towards the central control nexus. They were guided by Lieutenant Singh, his Omni-tool flashing as it mapped out the complex labyrinth of the Zorgan systems. Left at the next junction, Singh called out, his voice taut with concentration. "The control room should be just ahead." They burst into the room in a hail of plasma fire, cutting down the startled Zorgan technicians before they could even reach for their weapons. Singh plugged his Omni-tool into the primary control console, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Uploading the virus now," he said, his brow furrowed with intense focus. "This should give those slimy bastards something to think about." On the screens around them, chaos erupted as the virus tore through the Zorgan systems. Ships and stations went dark, their power grids failing, their weapons faltering. In the shipyard's depths, half-built warships shuddered and collapsed, their skeletal frames twisting and crumpling. In the hangar bay, Sergeant Tanaka and her Marines fought like demons, their weapons blazing as they cut a swath through the Zorgan ranks. They moved from cover to cover, using the shipyard's own equipment against their foes, overloading power conduits, toppling gantry cranes, turning the entire vast space into a killing ground. But the Zorgans were far from beaten. As the initial shock of the attack wore off, they began to regroup, to rally their forces. Heavily armed counter-assault teams poured into the hangar, their weapons spitting death and destruction. Tanaka and her Marines found themselves driven back, forced to give ground in the face of the Zorgan onslaught. They fought with grim determination, making the enemy pay for every inch of space they took. But the sheer weight of numbers was against them. In the control nexus, Novik and her team watched the battle unfolding on the monitors, their faces tight with tension. They could see the Marines being pushed back, the Zorgans gaining ground. They knew that time was running out. "The virus is in the system," Singh reported, his voice strained. "But it's going to take time to propagate, to do its work. We need to buy the Marines more time." Novik nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. "Then that's what we'll do," she said. "We'll fight our way to the hangar, link up with Tanaka and her team. We hold the line, no matter the cost. We give that virus the time it needs to bring this whole place down around the Zorgan's ears." Zarn hefted his plasma rifle, his alien features set in a grim mask. "For the galaxy," he said softly. "For the galaxy," Novik echoed. And then they were moving, racing through the corridors towards the sound of battle, towards the fate that awaited them. In the hangar, Tanaka and her Marines fought with the strength of desperation, with the fire of human courage and defiance. They knew they were hopelessly outnumbered, knew that they couldn't hold out forever. But they also knew what was at stake, knew that every second they held the line was a second closer to victory. And then Novak was there, Singh and Zarn, and the rest of the hackers at her side, their weapons blazing as they joined the fray. The Marines cheered at the sight of them, their flagging spirits lifted by the arrival of reinforcements. Together, humans and allies, they fought as one, a single united force against the darkness. They fought for their worlds, for their people, for the dream of a galaxy free from the shadow of Zorgan tyranny. And in the end, as the shipyards shuddered and crumbled around them, as the virus completed its devastating work, they emerged victorious, battered and bloodied, but unbowed, triumphant against all the odds. As they limped back to the waiting Trojan, supporting their wounded, mourning their fallen, Novak looked back at the ruins of the Nexus shipyards. She saw the twisted wreckage of Zorgan ships, the smoldering debris of their shattered dreams of conquest. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The Zorgans would not take this defeat lightly. They would come back, stronger and more determined than ever. The war was far from over. But for now, in this moment, humanity and its allies had struck a blow that would echo through the ages. They had shown the galaxy the power of unity, the strength of courage and sacrifice. They had lit a flame that would never be extinguished, a beacon of hope in the long night of war. And they would carry that flame forward, no matter the darkness that lay ahead. For they were the guardians of the galaxy's future, the champions of its freedom. And they would not rest until that future was secure, until the shadow of the Zorgans was banished forever from the stars. Turning the tide. In the aftermath of the Nexus raid, the Galactic Council races rejoiced at the blow dealt to the Zorgan war machine. The destruction of the shipyards had been a stunning victory, a testament to the courage and ingenuity of the human-led strike force. But Admiral Jenna Novak knew that the celebration would be short-lived. The Zorgans were wounded, but far from defeated. They would regroup, rebuild, and return with a vengeance. The war was entering a new phase, and the Council needed to press its advantage while it still could. In a series of daring raids and lightning strikes, human forces led the charge against key Zorgan strongholds and supply lines. They struck hard and fast, using the same unconventional tactics that had served them so well at Nexus. On the planet Pyrios, Surgeon Tanaka and her Marines fought a brutal ground campaign against Zorgan occupation forces. They liberated slave camps, armed resistance fighters, and turned the planet's harsh, volcanic terrain into a nightmare for the reptilian invaders. In the Auriga Belt, Lieutenant Singh led a daring hacker attack against the Zorgan comm network, disrupting their ability to coordinate their forces and sowing chaos throughout their ranks. And at the Battle of the Maelstrom, Admiral Novak herself commanded a combined fleet of human and council ships in a head-on assault against a massive Zorgan armada. The battle raged for days in the swirling depths of a stellar nebula, the ships dancing a deadly waltz of fire and fury. In the end, the Council forces emerged victorious. The Zorgan fleet shattered and scattered to the cosmic winds. It was a turning point in the war, a moment when the tide began to shift inexorably in favor of the Allied races. Across the galaxy, oppressed peoples rose up against their Zorgan overlords, emboldened by the victories of the human-led offensive. Resistance movements sprang up on 100 worlds, each one a spark of defiance against the darkness. The Zorgans reeled under the onslaught, their once unstoppable advance grinding to a halt. They lashed out with brutal reprisals, targeting civilian populations in a desperate attempt to crush the growing rebellion. But for every atrocity they committed, 10 more worlds flocked to the Council's banner. At the forefront of it all was humanity, the once overlooked newcomers who had now become the symbol of the galaxy's resistance. Their courage, their tenacity, their sheer indomitable will had inspired a revolution, a groundswell of hope and determination that would not be denied. In the Council chambers, Ambassador Zarn watched the reports of victory after victory with a mix of awe and pride. He had always known that humanity had a role to play in the galactic stage, but even he had never dreamed of the heights to which they would rise. Beside him, Admiral Novak stood tall and proud, her uniform still stained with the dust and blood of a dozen battlefields. She had been the tip of the spear, the driving force behind humanity's ascent. But she knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. "The Zorgans are on the run," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the star map that dominated the chamber. "But they won't go down easily. They'll fight to the last, with everything they have. We need to be ready for their counterattack, for whatever desperate gambit they try next." Zarn nodded, his alien features set in a grim expression. "Warlord Crag is still out there," he said. "As long as he lives, the Zorgans will never surrender. He's the heart and soul of their war machine, the embodiment of their cruel ambition." Novik's eyes narrowed, a cold fire burning in their depths. "Then we take the fight to him," she said. "We find Crag, wherever he's hiding, and we end this war once and for all, no matter the cost." It was a bold plan, a desperate gambit, but Novik had built her reputation on such gambles, on the willingness to risk everything for the sake of victory. And as she looked around the council chambers, at the faces of her allies and friends, she knew that they would follow her to the very gates of hell if that's what it took. For they were bound now by more than just a common cause, more than just a shared enemy. They were bound by the unbreakable bonds of shared sacrifice, of blood spilled and lives given in the name of freedom. They had come so far, had achieved so much. The once invincible Zorgan Empire was crumbling, its iron grip on the galaxy loosening with every passing day. But the final battle was still to come, the ultimate test of everything they had built and fought for. And as Novak and her allies prepared for that final confrontation, as they gathered their strength and steeled their resolve, they knew that the fate of the galaxy would be decided in the fires of that crucible. They would emerge from it victorious, or not at all. There could be no middle ground, no compromise with the darkness. They would fight until the last breath, the last drop of blood. For the sake of all they held dear, for the dreams of generations yet unborn, they would see this through to the end. And in that final reckoning, in that ultimate moment of truth, they would show the galaxy the true measure of human courage, of the unbreakable spirit that had carried them so far. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and as the battle lines were drawn, as the final chapter of the war began to unfold, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The old order was passing, swept away in the tides of change and upheaval, and in its place, a new era was dawning, an era of hope and unity, of strength and diversity, an era led by the indomitable will and unquenchable spirit of humanity, the once overlooked race that had now become the beacon of the galaxy's future. And as that future beckoned, as the promise of a new dawn rose on the horizon, Novak and her allies stood ready to meet it head-on, ready to fight for it, to bleed for it, to give everything they had for the sake of that shining vision. For they were the guardians of that future, the champions of that dream. And they would not rest until it was made real, until the shadow of tyranny was banished forever from the stars. The Zorgans had awoken a sleeping giant, had unleashed a force they could never hope to contain. And now, in the final reckoning, they would reap the whirlwind of humanity's wrath, and the galaxy would tremble at the fury of that storm. The warlord's wrath. In the depths of Zorgan space, on a bleak and barren world known only as the Crucible, Warlord Crag brooded in his command fortress. The once mighty ruler of the Zorgan Empire was a seething mass of rage and hatred, his eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 suns. He had watched his armies crumble, his conquest falter, all at the hands of the upstart humans and their council allies. He had seen his shipyards destroyed, his supply lines shattered, his once unstoppable war machine ground to a halt. But Crag was far from defeated. He was a warrior to the core, a being forged in the crucible of 1,000 battles. He would not go quietly into the night, would not surrender his dreams of galactic domination without a fight. And so, in the shadows of the crucible, he gathered his strength. He rallied his most fanatical followers, the elite guard who would follow him into the very jaws of oblivion. And he planned his revenge, a final, terrible blow against the forces that had dared to defy him. Across the galaxy, Admiral Jenna Novak and her allies could sense the gathering storm. They knew that Crag was out there, knew that he would not rest until he had his vengeance. And so they prepared for the final battle, the ultimate confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy. They gathered their fleets and armies, forged new alliances and strategies, steeled themselves for the fire and fury to come. At the forefront of it all was Novak, the indomitable human admiral who had become the symbol of the resistance. She was the beacon of hope, the guiding light in the darkness. And she would lead the charge against Crag, no matter the cost. The first blow came without warning, a savage assault on the Council's frontline defenses. Crag's elite forces struck with a ferocity and precision that caught the Allies off guard, driving them back in a series of bloody skirmishes. At the Battle of the Ember Nebula, Crag himself took to the field, his command ship a behemoth of destruction that tore through the Council fleet like a hot knife through butter. Novak and her forces fought with desperation and courage, but they were outmatched and outgunned. They retreated in disarray, leaving a trail of shattered ships and broken bodies in their wake. It was a bitter defeat, a reminder of the sheer power and ruthlessness of the Zorgan warlord. But Novak refused to give in to despair. She rallied her forces, regrouped and rearmed. And she prepared for the next round, the inevitable counterattack that would come. It came sooner than expected, a massive Zorgan offensive aimed at the heart of Council space. Crag had thrown everything he had into this final gambit, a last desperate bid to turn the tide of the war. At the spearhead of the assault was the Crucible itself, the warlord's command fortress now transformed into a mobile battle station of terrifying power. It tore through the Council defenses like a juggernaut, unstoppable and implacable. Novak and her allies fought with everything they had, throwing ships and soldiers against the Zorgan onslaught in a desperate attempt to stem the tide. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a paper cup. The sheer weight of the enemy advance was overwhelming. In the chaos of the battle, Novak found herself face to face with Crag himself, the two adversaries locked in a duel of wills and weapons. They clashed in the heart of the maelstrom, their ships dancing a deadly waltz amidst the fire and the fury. It was a battle that would echo through the ages, a titanic struggle between two indomitable forces. Novak fought with all the skill and courage of her human heritage, Crag with all the savagery and cunning of his Zorgan bloodline. In the end, it was a stalemate, both ships crippled, both leaders battered and bloodied. But as they withdrew to lick their wounds and regroup their forces, both knew that this was only the beginning. The final battle was still to come, the ultimate reckoning that would decide the fate of the galaxy. And both Novak and Crag knew that only one of them would walk away from that confrontation. Across the stars, the war raged on, the Council and the Zorgans locked in a deadly embrace. Worlds burned, fleets clashed, armies struggled in the dust and the blood of 100 battlefields. But always at the center of the storm were Novak and Crag, the two adversaries whose destinies were now inextricably intertwined. They were the twin poles of the conflict, the embodiments of the forces that now struggled for the soul of the galaxy. And as the final battle approached, as the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation, both knew that the end was near. One way or another, the long night of war was drawing to a close. In the Council chambers, Ambassador Zarn and the other leaders could only watch and wait, their fate now resting in the hands of Novak and her human warriors. They had come so far, had sacrificed so much, but the true test was still to come. And so they prayed, each in their own way, to whatever gods or forces they believed in. They prayed for strength, for courage, for the fire and the fury to see them through to the end. For in the final reckoning, in the crucible of that ultimate battle, the fate of the galaxy would be decided once and for all. And the price of failure was too terrible to contemplate. The stage was set. The pieces were in motion. And as the curtain rose on the final act of this cosmic drama, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The old order was crumbling. The ancient certainties swept away in the tides of war and chaos, and in its place, a new world was struggling to be born. A world forged in the fires of conflict, tempered in the heat of battle. A world where the courage and indomitable spirit of humanity would be the guiding light, the beacon of hope in the darkness. A world where the sacrifices of the fallen would be remembered and honored, their names etched forever in the annals of galactic history. And as that world beckoned, as the promise of a new dawn rose on the horizon, Novak and her allies stood ready to fight for it to the last breath, to the last drop of blood. For they were the guardians of that future, the champions of that dream. And they would not rest until it was made real, until the shadow of tyranny was banished forever from the stars. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and in the final battle, in the crucible of that ultimate test, the warriors of humanity would give everything they had to tip the scales towards victory, or perish in the attempt. For such was the price of freedom, the cost of a galaxy reborn. And they would pay it gladly, for the sake of all they held dear. In-game, the crucible loomed before them, a monstrosity of metal and malice that hung in the void like a dark star. It was the heart of the Zorgan war machine, the seat of Warlord Krag's power. And it was here that the final battle would be fought, the ultimate fate of the galaxy decided. Admiral Jenna Novak stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Dauntless, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen that showed the approaching behemoth. Around her, the combined fleets of the Council races hung in formation, a glittering array of ships and stations that stretched as far as the eye could see. They were the last line of defense, the final bulwark against the Zorgan onslaught, and they were ready to give everything they had in this last, desperate stand. At Novak's side stood her closest allies and friends, Ambassador Zarn of the Arcturians, Sergeant Tanaka of the Marines, Lieutenant Singh of the Hackers. They were the core of her team, the ones who had been with her through thick and thin, through fire and fury, and the very jaws of hell. Together, they had planned this final assault, a daring gambit to strike at the very heart of the enemy. They would engage the crucible head-on, drawing out its defenses and distracting its crew. While the battle raged, a small team of infiltrators would breach the station's hull and make their way to the command center, where Krag himself awaited. It was a desperate plan, a long shot in every sense of the word. But it was the only chance they had, the only way to end this war once and for all. As the fleets closed in, the crucible came to life, its weapon systems powering up with a malevolent hum. Novak tensed, her hand hovering over the controls of her command chair. "This is it," she said, her voice steady and calm despite the tension that thrummed through her veins. "All ships, engage at will. Let's show these bastards what we're made of." And with that, the battle was joined. The crucible opened fire, its massive cannons spitting streams of plasma and antimatter into the Allied ranks. Ships exploded and crumpled, their hulls shattering under the onslaught. But the Council forces gave as good as they got, their own weapons blazing in response. Fighters and bombers swarmed around the crucible, darting in and out of its firing arcs like angry hornets. Massive dreadnoughts pounded at its shields, their guns hammering away with relentless fury. In the midst of the chaos, a small, sleek ship detached from the Dauntless and slipped through the maelstrom, its cloaking field shimmering around it like a mirage. On board were Novak's infiltration team, Tanaka, Singh, and a hand-picked squad of the best and brightest from across the Allied forces. They were the tip of the spear, the ones who would strike the final blow against Krag and his empire of cruelty. And as they raced towards the crucible's hull, their hearts pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. They breached the station's defenses with a series of precise, surgical strikes, their weapons cutting through metal and circuitry like a hot knife through butter. And then they were inside, racing through the labyrinthine corridors of the Zorgan stronghold. They met resistance at every turn. Elite Zorgan warriors, fanatically loyal to their warlord, who fought with a savagery and skill that was terrifying to behold. But Tanaka and her team were equal to the challenge, their own training and courage matching the enemy blow for blow. Through firefights and ambushes, through traps and treachery, they fought their way deeper into the heart of the crucible. And always at the back of their minds was the knowledge of what awaited them at the end of their journey. Warlord Crag himself, the monster at the heart of the Zorgan war machine. Outside, the battle raged on, the fabric of space itself seeming to tremble under the fury of the assault. Ships died in flames, their crews consigned to the cold embrace of the void. But still the Allies pressed on, driven by a determination and unity of purpose that was unbreakable. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Novak watched the tide of battle with a grim intensity, her mind racing with 1,000 calculations and contingencies. She knew that every moment, every shot, every life lost could be the one that tipped the balance towards victory or defeat. And then suddenly, a voice crackled over the comm. Tanaka's voice, strained and breathless, but alive with triumph. "Admiral, we've reached the command center. Crag is here. We're going in." Novak closed her eyes for a moment, a silent prayer on her lips. And then she nodded, her voice steady and clear. "Understood, Sergeant. Give him hell." In the heart of the crucible, in a vast, shadowed chamber that pulsed with malevolent energy, Warlord Crag awaited his fate. He was a towering figure, clad in armor of blackest night, his eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 conquered worlds. At his feet lay the bodies of the Zorgan guards who had died to protect him, their lifeblood staining the metal deck. But Crag himself was untouched, his bearing regal and unconcerned, as if the fate of the galaxy was a trifling thing beneath his notice. Tanaka and her team burst into the chamber, their weapons raised and ready. And for a moment, the two sides simply stared at each other, hunter and hunted, predator and prey. Then Crag spoke, his voice a rumble of distant thunder. "So the mighty humans have come at last," he said, his tone mocking and cruel. "Come to die at the feet of their better, like the mooling infants they are." Tanaka stepped forward, her rifle leveled at the warlord's head. "We've come to end this, Crag," she said, her voice cold and hard. "Your reign of terror is over. Surrender now, and you may yet live to see the inside of a council prison cell." Crag laughed, the sound like the grating of metal on bone. "Surrender? To the likes of you? I think not, little monkey. I am Crag, the scourge of 1,000 worlds, the master of the Zorgan race. I do not surrender. I conquer." And with that, he moved, faster than the Otta could follow. His blade, a shimmering shard of darkness, leaped into his hand, and he charged forward with a roar of primal fury. Tanaka and her team opened fire, their weapons stitching a pattern of death across the chamber. But Crag was a blur of motion, his blade weaving a web of destruction that turned their shots aside like raindrops. He was among them in an instant, his blade flashing and cutting with a skill that was almost beautiful in its deadliness. Soldiers fell, their armor rent, and their bodies broken. But Tanaka and Singh stood firm, their own blades leaping to meet the warlords. They were outmatched in sheer strength and speed, but they fought with a courage and tenacity that was the stuff of legends. Blow after blow they traded, sparks flying and metal screaming. And slowly, inch by painful inch, they drove the warlord back, their blades finding the chinks in his armor, their wills unbreakable in the face of his fury. And then, in a final, desperate lunge, Tanaka's blade found its mark, piercing the warlord's black heart. Crag staggered, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice a gurgle of blood. "I cannot be defeated by mere humans." But defeated he was, and as he fell, as the light faded from his eyes and his empire crumbled around him, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath in wonder. For the impossible had happened. The unthinkable had come to pass. Warlord Crag, the scourge of the stars, was dead, and the galaxy was free. In the silence that followed, as the last echoes of battle faded and the smoke began to clear, Admiral Novak and her allies stood tall and proud, their faces streaked with the grime of victory. They had done the impossible. They had brought down a tyrant, had freed a galaxy from the shadow of his cruelty. And in that moment, as the realization of their triumph began to sink in, they knew that nothing would ever be the same again. For they had shown the galaxy the true strength of the human spirit, the indomitable will and courage that could overcome any odds, defeat any foe. They were the heroes of a new age, the champions of a brighter tomorrow. And as they looked out across the stars, to the endless possibilities that awaited them, they knew that the future was theirs to shape, theirs to dream. For they were humanity. They were the council races. They were the guardians of the galaxy. And they would never, ever surrender. A new era. In the aftermath of Warlord Crag's fall, the galaxy held its breath, hardly daring to believe that the long nightmare was finally over. But as the news spread, as the reality of the Zorgon's defeat sank in, a wave of jubilation and relief swept across the stars. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 cities, people took to the streets in celebration. They danced and sang, laughed and wept, their hearts bursting with a joy that they had never thought to feel again. For so long, they had lived under the shadow of the Zorgon threat, had known nothing but fear and despair. But now, at last, they were free. Across the galaxy, the remnants of the Zorgon Empire crumbled and fell, their armies surrendering en masse, their leaders fleeing into exile or falling to the vengeance of those they had oppressed. Without Crag's iron will to hold them together, they were nothing, just a rabble of broken warriors and shattered dreams. And in the halls of power, in the great chambers of the Galactic Council, a new order began to take shape. The old guard, the ones who had failed to see the Zorgon threat for what it was, who had been content to appease and compromise, found themselves swept aside by a tide of change and reform. In their place rose a new generation of leaders, visionaries who had been forged in the crucible of war, who had seen firsthand the courage and selflessness of the allied races. They were the ones who would shape the future of the galaxy, who would build a new society based on the ideals of unity, equality, and justice. And at the forefront of this new order stood the humans, the once overlooked race who had now become the symbol of hope and resilience for the entire galaxy. In recognition of their incredible sacrifices and unwavering bravery, they were granted a permanent seat on the council, their voice and their vision now an integral part of the galactic community. Admiral Jenna Novak, the hero of the war, found herself hailed as a living legend, her name spoken with awe and reverence on 1,000 worlds. She was the one who had led the charge against the Zorgons, who had rallied the allied races in their darkest hour and guided them to victory against all odds. But Novak knew that the true credit belonged to all those who had fought and bled beside her, to the countless soldiers and civilians who had given their lives in the cause of freedom. They were the real heroes, the ones who had made the ultimate sacrifice so that others might live. And so, as the galaxy began to rebuild, as the wounds of war slowly began to heal, Novak dedicated herself to honoring their memory, to ensuring that their sacrifice would not be in vain. She worked tirelessly to promote the cause of peace and understanding, to bring the disparate races of the galaxy together in a new spirit of cooperation and harmony. It was not an easy task, for the scars of war ran deep, and old prejudices and animosities die hard. But Novak was nothing if not determined, and she had the support of a galaxy that had seen the power of unity firsthand. Step by step, day by day, the galaxy began to change. Former enemies became allies, old rivalries gave way to new partnerships. And slowly but surely, a new sense of purpose and identity began to emerge, a feeling that they were all part of something greater, that their fates were intertwined in a way that transcended species or origin. At the heart of this new identity was a profound respect for the resilience and indomitable spirit of humanity. The galaxy had seen what the humans were capable of, had witnessed their courage and selflessness in the face of unimaginable odds. And they knew that if they could harness even a fraction of that spirit, there was nothing they could not achieve. And so, As the years passed and the memories of war began to fade, the galaxy entered a new era of peace and prosperity, a golden age unlike any it had ever known. Under the wise and benevolent leadership of the Council, of which humanity was now an integral part, the stars became a place of wonder and discovery, of endless possibilities and untold potential. New worlds were explored, new civilizations contacted and befriended. The boundaries of knowledge were pushed back, the secrets of the universe slowly but surely unraveled. And always at the forefront of this great endeavor stood the humans, their courage and curiosity an inspiration to all who knew them. As for Admiral Novak, she found herself at the center of this brave new world, a beacon of hope and guidance for a galaxy that had come to rely on her wisdom and strength. She had never sought power or glory for herself, had only ever wanted to do what was right. But now she found herself in a position to shape the course of history, to guide the galaxy towards a brighter and more hopeful future. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders, but one that she bore with grace and humility. For she knew that she was not alone, that she had the support and love of a galaxy that had come to see her as a symbol of all that was best in themselves. And so, as she looked out across the stars, at the endless expanse of worlds and civilizations that stretched before her, Admiral Jenna Novak felt a sense of profound gratitude and awe. She had been given a great gift, the chance to make a difference, to leave her mark on the universe in a way that few ever could. It was a legacy that would endure long after she was gone, a testament to the courage and sacrifice of all those who had fought and died for the cause of freedom. And as the galaxy entered this new era of peace and discovery, as the promise of a brighter tomorrow beckoned on the horizon, she knew that their memory would live on, forever cherished and honored by those who came after. For they were the heroes of the galaxy, the ones who had stood against the darkness and prevailed. And their story, the story of humanity's rise and the Zorgon's fall, would be told and retold for generations to come, a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for all who heard it. It was a story that would never be forgotten, a legend that would endure as long as the stars themselves. And as Admiral Novak and her allies stood at the threshold of this new era, they knew that they had been a part of something truly extraordinary, something that would change the course of history forever. The war was over, the galaxy was free, and the future, with all its infinite promise and possibility, lay open before them, waiting to be shaped by the courage and vision of those who dared to dream. It was a new beginning, a chance to build a better world, a brighter tomorrow. And as humanity and its allies stepped forward into that future, they did so with heads held high and hearts filled with hope, ready to face whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead. For they were the guardians of the galaxy, the protectors of all that was good and just, and they would never, ever back down from that sacred trust, no matter what the future might bring.